2 engines. 1 title. Who is better for modelling Thomas? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Railway Shed. Today we'll be putting these 2 engines against each other to find out the question, who is better, of course in my opinion, to model Thomas the Tank Engine? Our competitors are this Hornby 2008 Thomas, as well as this 2020 Bachmann Europe Thomas. We'll test these engines in accuracy, haulage, detail, but most importantly, which one is better? I hope you liked that fun little intro. It was definitely fun to make. But anyway, today we're going to be putting these 2 engines against each other to see which one really is the better Thomas for your pricing. Now, I know technically they're completely different scales, but to my knowledge, these are the only ready-to-run 00/HO gauge Thomas the Tank engines that are on the market, or second-hand in the Hornby one's case. But yeah, so let's put them against each other. We will start with the Hornby Thomas. The original Hornby Thomas model released in 1985 to coincide with the first series of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. It used tooling from an engine in their current range at the time, which was the London Brighton South Coast Railway E2 class locomotive. Here's one for comparison to the actual engine. Here's the E2 for comparison. We can see it has many similar components. For example, the general cab, dome, as well as on the Hornby Thomas, you can vaguely see the spot where the whistle for the E2 is supposed to go. They also have similar indoor moulding, however Thomas has a closed door as opposed to the open one of the E2. The tooling was slightly changed, however, to incorporate Thomas's distinct extended side tank, which was actually a feature on the second batch of E2s, and the splasher on the most forward wheel. If anything, it was a good job that Hornby had these models in the range at the time, as it was a good basis to base the Thomas off. I also did a separate review of the Hornby E2, which is linked below if you would like to watch it. This specific Hornby model is from 2008, coinciding with the Great Discoveries release. Because of this, it was part of the initial Thomas range, with the darker blue, sort of darker faces, as well as the general darker colours. I believe the modern range, which ran from about 2015 until 2018, had DCC compatibility. I do also have an example of this range of Thomas, but I cannot get it or find it at the moment. This model does not have traction tyres and is stamped 2009 Ghislaine Thomas Limited. It is actually missing a coupling forward, but I can put that down to this being my very first model engine in 00 gauge. Accuracy-wise to the actual Thomas in the show, I would say this leans more heavily into the Railway Series canon, and at that, the earlier Railway Series, where Thomas was distinctly an E2, with distinct E2 features, like the lowered running board, which will be later repaired in the story Thomas Comes to Breakfast. For this, I quite like this engine as it's a more realistic take and looks more at home on a model railway despite its livery, which of course is completely fictional, but I think a rather dazzling one for any engine to support. I would definitely say the face screams Thomas, despite the sort of off colour. It definitely looks like him from the show, and any kid would recognise this as Thomas. At least they used to be able to. Unlike the Bachmann model, this one actually has some inner detailing thanks to its sharing mould of the E2, which would be easily paintable if you could get in there, as well as spoked handrails for the bunker. The coal load, however, is not very distinctive. It does have lamp brackets on the back though, as well as it did used to have vacuum pipes, but this being my first model, they're long gone. Now let's test this engine's performance at slow speed and otherwise. We'll just bring it back slightly. Let's put it into forward and let's watch it at slow speed. Or I suppose we're going backwards. Other than the slight stalls, I have found this to be a reliable runner backwards. It probably just needs a good oil up, as I haven't used my models in quite a time. Probably should have run it in before the video started. But let's accelerate a tad. Seems it's caught on something. But there we can see it run smoothly. Now let's bring it forward. But what is Thomas without his two faithful coaches, Annie and Clarabel? Let's take a brief look at them. Annie and Clarabel didn't really undergo much change without the whole run of Hornby Thomas products. Till 2014 they mostly stayed in the same colour, supporting the same faces. They used the basic Hornby Railroad four-wheeled coach body, which some might say is underwhelming, but I think is quite charming. Despite not being able to use a proper setup, we'll give it a bit of a haulage test to get to this distance at the buffer. Thomas will be drilling the Hornby Annie and Clarabel, an FX Mark 1, as well as the Bachmann Annie and Clarabel. Let's see how Thomas performs. Let's see it move. Of course it stalls slightly, but once it gets going, manages like nothing's attached. I know this isn't much of a weight, but compared to the Bachmann Thomas, as you'll soon see, it's a mighty puller, which I think I give in gratitude to the wider wheelbase, which applies more pressure to the track at multiple points, as well as the stronger motor. We can also see how much of a crawl we can get out of this when it's on good track with good connection. We can also then see its top speed, which is quite high. I know this is probably not something I should do with my models, but it's all I really have to do it as I don't have a rolling road. So that's the Hornby Thomas done. let's move on to the Bachmann one. The Bachmann Thomases were originally produced in 2002 in the US. Unlike the Hornby models, they use a completely new tooling, as Bachmann didn't have an E2 in their range. So, to counter this, they used a more model series style Thomas body. Let's take a closer look into the detail of this engine. We can see that this engine has separately fitted whistles, separately fitted steps up to the cab, as well as separately fitted lamp irons, lamps, as well as a back lamp, as well as a vacuum pipe and these strange looking hooks. The model's in a more accurate colour to the show, as opposed to the Hornby one, which is in a lot darker, which I believe is supposed to more closely represent the model series version of Thomas. But for me, personally, the biggest letdown of this model is its face. For some reason they used this weird promo art as the only basis for the face, without using any reference to the show. This just makes it look creepy, as this face was never really supposed to be put into 3D and was only used for promo art. So compared with the Hornby E2, I would say, though the slight discoloration to this one, the Hornby has the more accurate face to represent Thomas. However, a notable feature of the Bachmann engines, Thomas as well as all the others, is that they have a moving eye mechanism which moves the eyes from side to side while the engine is moving. This feature, however, puts great strain on the motor and leaves less performance for the wheels, so it can pull less and is not as great as a performer. But in summary, proportionally, I think this looks a lot more like Thomas, disregarding the face entirely. So speaking of performance, let's see how this Thomas does with our rather mixed train. The engine only has to move from here to the buffers, but keep in mind this is a slight uphill gradient. So let's give Thomas some power. And he's stalled. He does manage this. However, you can definitely hear the extra strain on the motor. But let's forget about the load. How does he perform? Usually, without any. That's the slowest speed he can do. So he's quite reliable, but let's see my verdict. In conclusion, I believe the best model of Thomas the Tank Engine is the Hornby Thomas. Just for its affordability, even now, its better traction, its better mechanism, and its more general likeness to something real, or what Thomas could be, I think this is just generally the better model of Thomas. And it looks more inclined to something you could actually run on a proper layout without it being too garish or out of place, which I think the darker livery especially attends to. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the Bachmann Thomas. It looks a lot like the model Thomas, and it is good for running, and I do quite like the eye mechanism despite the weird face. But this is a £60 model at the end of the day, and these go for about 30 to 40 second hand, even though they've only not been produced since 2016. So overall, I would recommend the Hornby Thomas. So thank you so much for watching. It's been great fun to record this video. I'm sorry for the short delay in the uploading of the video. This was supposed to come out on Sunday, however, the first attempt of filming this got corrupted, so I had to refilm practically the whole thing. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.